Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first of a series of webinars that Earthworm Foundation will host. My name is Bastien Sachet. I'm the CEO of Earthworm, based here in Switzerland, and I'm very happy to be part of these global discussions that today on resilience, which will focus on landscapes and supply chains. A bit of information today. We'll have, so I'll ask everyone to go on mute. So that we can hear well. A few words about Earthworm Foundation. We are a global organization, non-profit. We have been out there for 20 years. I'm sure many of you know us. And what we do is we basically work with businesses to transform their supply chains with an objective to regenerate landscapes with a focus on forest soils. And of course, the people that are at the roots of supply chains, the workers, the communities, and the farmers. We have about 230 people who are working on the ground for a majority of them, which has been a challenge recently, and are active in about 25 countries. So today we have got the pleasure to welcome great speakers, some from Earthworm and some from other organizations who we work with or partner with. So first we'll have Jonathan Merker, who leads the work on landscapes, sharing some ideas and concepts. We then will hear from David Penlington. He's a global mass sourcing director, and then sustainable sourcing director. And then we'll hear from our colleagues in Indonesia, Yulia Hardini and Stephen Patriarcho, who are deeply involved in the landscape work. We'll have a panel discussions with David, of course, with Clement from Avril, Jan Siraga, who will join us from Indonesia. We'll have Rob Nichols from Muzimas, he's the general manager of programs and projects, and I will try to moderate the discussion. I just wanted to just come back on the title. You know, we talk. We've put the word resilience in the title, and why do we want to focus on resilience now? I mean, I don't know how you feel when you look at this picture of basically a farmer dumping milk in his backyard, but it makes me completely mad because the people during this COVID episode who have been basically feeding us and keeping us well are the very people who are suffering now. Not directly from the COVID, also some of them might, but they are suffering from low prices. The supply chains have been disturbed, and so these guys have to very low milk prices, low cocoa prices, or low palm prices. And so the guys who have been feeding us, the guys who have been maintaining the ecosystems today are the guys who are suffering. And they are suffering in their corners, in the rural areas. We don't hear a lot about these guys, but that's a reality. And COVID has put a light on this fragility. And this fragility which existed before anyway with climate change and the shocks that are coming, but it's something that is coming even in a stronger way to us as we look at the post-COVID situation. Maybe just a quick snapshot on what resilience is. Well, this is a great illustration that shows that resilience is basically the capacity to absorb a shock over time. When the image I use for resilience is a bit like a net, and you've got a ball coming into a net, and if the net is quite strong, the ball will bounce back quite quickly. But if the net is weak, it will keep the shape of the impact. I think on our side, what we are aiming for is to have a strong net, and the net for me is the supply chain and the relationships that are built between, you know, the various actors, the partners, the companies, the suppliers, the farmers, the government. And that net is particularly important in the landscapes that are our focus. I also want to insist on the fact that resilience is something that is a deeper, more profound concept, and also more adequate concept going forward when we look at supply chains. A lot of supply chain has been looked through the angle of compliance. Are you compliant with our policy? Can you, and compliance is good to manage the risk of one actor in the supply chain, often the one who is downstream or consumer focused. But when you look at resilience, you look at the whole picture of the supply chain. And that's why today we want to focus on that. We will look in particular at the resilience from a raw materials point of view. So when I'm a company and I source raw materials, what do I do? And from a landscape perspective in particular, how do we cultivate that resilience in environment where it's very fragile? We will take an example with the Luso ecosystem, which is a North Sumatra area in which we've been working, where it's a particularly fragile but important area for the world in terms of resilience. So with no further delay and hoping that we will overcome the little technological challenges, I will hand over to my colleague, Jonathan Merker, who will just tell us a little bit about landscapes. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bastian. Okay, so thank you very much. I want to talk with you all a little bit today about the landscape approach and how Earthworm works on landscapes. So we approach landscapes from the supply chain point of view. Having worked for more than 20 years with many companies and other actors in global commodity supply chains all along the different segments of the supply chain on sustainability and responsible sourcing. And this work has achieved a lot of progress and a lot of success in the past few years. However, I think there is a more or less global recognition that there are some critical issues that are not possible to solve simply by working within one supply chain or one industry alone. And so take deforestation as a good example. Deforestation, is plagues many areas. But let's say if the palm industry has adopted a no deforestation commitment and have stopped deforesting in an area, but cocoa or coffee farmers continue, then you are not achieving the impact you want to achieve of stopping it simply by working with only palm. Similarly, with farmer livelihood, farmers are connected to many different supply chains and many different actors. So in order to work on improving livelihoods, you need to work with all these different actors. Land conflict is another issue we see in many areas, and it's complex, involves many different communities, many companies, and often government. So there is a need for an integrated approach to working on these issues and sustainability in order to shape sustainability into the foundation of supply chain resilience that Bastian just was talking about. So thinking about landscapes now with this in mind, I think the easiest way to think about the landscape approach is as a way to give you a bird's eye point of view of your supply chain, thinking about the context and the environment surrounding you. What exists here? Is there forest and rivers? Who are the actors around me? How am I impacting them? How are they impacting me? And by taking this approach, it helps you identify the key issues you want to work on and how they are interconnected throughout the landscape. And so the landscape approach really is an opportunity to maximize impact and minimize cost and risk through collaboration and through a holistic approach. And by focusing on connectivity and by focusing on collaboration, we believe this is a really powerful approach for building resilience. And so just a few examples of what a landscape can look like. It could be a mountain valley in Peru, where we are working on deforestation with many different farmers. It could be a forest reserve in the Ivory Coast, where communities are entering the reserve for lack of areas to plant cacao on. Or it could be a municipality in Brazil where there's a lack of smallholder resilience. And so I wanted to show also a little bit how we work with the landscape approach to make it this a bit more concrete. It's a holistic approach for us, a way to work on several different issues in these key areas, such as deforestation and social conflict and smallholder livelihoods that are all connected. It's a way to work with the private sector to drive transformation in these areas. It's a way to partner with other key actors and to collaborate as landscapes and the challenges we face are large and collaboration is necessary. It's a way to help build local ownership of these processes by empowering local people to manage landscapes in the long run. And to achieve this, we work with permanent staff on the ground in order to build the relationships of trust necessary with local people and to be a local stakeholder. We use the power of the landscape approach as providing that bird's eye point of view to constantly look at ways to scale up impact and achieve more. We use data-driven impact management to look at what is working, what is being achieved, and what needs to be improved. And we do this over clearly defined areas in order to know which actors to work with and what type of issues we need to work on. And so I wanted to finish on this slide, which is the global map of the landscapes we're currently working in. The interesting thing here, I think, to think about is that the landscape approach and working with landscapes works in many different contexts, in many different countries, and in many different types of environments. And this is really why we think it's a key part of helping building supply chain resilience in moving forward. Okay, thank you, Bastian.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I will directly hand over the microphone to David Penlington. David is a Global Sustainable Sourcing Director at Mars Wrigley. And hear from him as a company that sources raw materials, how is it to build resilience in the supply chain and eventually in the landscapes? Over to you, David.
So I'll just say hello, but good to see everyone here and pleased to participate. So let me describe Mars's journey and how that links into landscapes, which Steve and Julia will explain some of the more detailed work on the ground. So just starting with Mars's purpose, the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today, and I'll just through my slides actually bring to life how Mars is approaching that. Everything that I'm going to talk about, and I'll use palm as the example as it links into the earthworm landscape work, is in service of the Mars Sustainable in a Generation plan. The Mars Sustainable in a Generation plan, which we launched in 2016, has three pillars. First pillar is Healthy Planet, where we will, as it says here, in line with what science says is necessary, keep the planet healthy. Underpinning our Healthy Planet pillar are some absolute greenhouse gas targets. We will reduce our greenhouse gas impact by 27% by 2025 and by 67% by 2050. Another pillar of our Sustainable Generation plan is nourishing well-being, ensuring the products that we produce help billions of people and their pets lead healthier, happier lives. And relevant again, more relevant back to our palm work, thriving people, where we, in our Sustainable Generation plan, improving the lives of 1 million people in our extended supply chain and understanding how their lives and how we can improve their lives through the way we do our business. If I switch gears to talk specifically about palm, in September 2019, we launched our Mars Palm Positive plan. Although we started publicly communicating about it, this was work that has been ongoing for at least 3 years. As it says in the slide here, we aim to 100% deforestation-free palm oil by the end of 2020 and advance respect for human rights across our suppliers' extended supply chains. So what are the elements within the Palm Positive plan? The first major element and intervention of our strategy is radical simplification of our supply chain within palm. We realized we had a very complicated supply chain, the region of 1,500 mills, 15 suppliers. And if we're actually going to deliver against our Sustainable Generation plan through our palm supply chain, we needed to change that. So we're working through the execution of our strategy, taking direct control of our direct supply chain, shifting to a supply chain with less than 100 mills by the end of 2020, and further reductions by the end of 2022 in our direct supply chain. It takes a lot of work. As part of that, we've been running and working with suppliers, running a due diligence on who will actually share our values going forward, who are the suppliers we're going to work with going forward, how can they support us in our simplification journey, but also we have expectations of those suppliers. And I think the important point in our Palm Positive plan is actually communicating and talking about the suppliers we will be working with in the future and what does that mean. So If I go to my next slide, the three other parts of our Palm Positive plan are, aside from working on our own direct supply chain, what are the expectations we have of our direct suppliers, and our expectations of how they're managing their wider business and their wider palm supply chain. So being confident that the suppliers we work with as we work on simplification actually have management systems in place managing their wider supply chain. So really monitoring the totality of their business and having approaches with their suppliers outside of our direct supply chain for achieving the expectations that we have. And the third aspect of our Palm Positive plan is not shying away from the bigger challenges as well of the palm sector. So how do we get to action on the ground with our suppliers, supporting them as well in that extended supply chain? And as we say here on the slide, so our ambition is, how do we create a path for successful and scalable sustainable livelihoods and within some of the world's most fragile ecosystems? So we've got a big focus in North Sumatra and Aceh. The reason we came to North Sumatra and Aceh, as we were going through our traceability work with Earthworm, which we've done over a number of years, which was part of understanding the complexity of our supply chain, understanding where we're connected in key landscapes, where there are very real challenges that we need to face into, and really understand the current reality. And my own personal journey, and I've been very privileged, and of course, whilst we're all staying safe, and I hope you and yours on the call here, we're all safe, not traveling over the period of the last few years, getting on the ground in Sumatra and Aceh, being very privileged to meet the communities, smallholders, understanding what their challenges are, and working also on understanding at a local level the government challenges, being engaged with parties. I was fortunate enough to meet the governor of Aceh as well, and understanding what their challenges are day to day. And it may well be a surprise. One of my first insights is, of course, being challenged back in a way, saying, well, why are foreigners actually interfering with actually what is our business? So that's one big insight. And then you continue the engagement and say, well, actually, what are some of the root causes that you're actually facing, and how can we work through that together? And putting at the heart of those solutions the livelihoods of those in the landscape, and really understanding what that can mean for the communities in those landscapes, working with the local government, aligning objectives which range from alleviating poverty, improving healthcare, improving education. And my own insights and why it links to the Earthworm work is understanding what are alternative choices for those communities, ranging through agroforestry, understanding perhaps with local government what are the land use planning, how do we understand how development can go forward, linked to better insights with land use management, also improving on the ground good agricultural practice, working with smallholders, reducing pressure on the landscape, joining a lot of activities up. In addition to the work with Earthworm, we have also been partnering, creating the Coalition of Sustainable Livelihoods, working with our peers and a number of civil society and government as well, focusing North Sumatra and Aceh. How do we bring things together and make them scalable and avoid fragmentation? And I think my final point within this journey, and this hopefully links to Steve and Yulia. The pictures on the right-hand side of my slide are actually visiting the projects that Earthworm has been working on, looking at root causes, thinking of alternative solutions. And the point isn't lost on me. these are very remote parts of the world. So getting on the ground, really understanding what's going on is the first part of beginning to understand the resilience needed, and being very clear that the solution to these challenges is putting at the heart of solutions sustainable livelihoods for the communities. Another, and perhaps it's an obvious insight, is those closest to the challenges often have the best ideas, and it may be they haven't the resource or the necessary infrastructure to realize the solutions that they themselves want to implement. So those pictures are real, of our team visiting the projects on the ground, realizing that these are remote parts of the world, but working really with those communities on the ground, and understanding how we put them at the center of solutions. And then part of my role, and working with Earthworm, working with Bastian and the team, is how can I actually help in making these solutions more scalable? Because it won't just be about Mars, of course, it won't just be about our suppliers. I would hope it's about all of us who have actually tuned into this webinar today. How can we join up and make this more scalable, whilst putting the communities at the heart of this, at the center of those solutions? Sebastian, I'll pause there and hand over. I hope that was okay to Steve and Julia.
Thank you, David. It's a good snapshot of what a company like Mars is doing. We can see you're taking action in your supply chains. You're also taking action in the landscapes by even putting the boots on the ground. We've got some questions coming, and we'll answer them later in the panel discussion. I will just let Julia Ardini, who is leading our work on smallholders in Indonesia, and Steve Patriarco, leading the work on programs, to share what is it that is happening there with brands like Mars, and give some insights about how the resilience is being cultivated, despite the challenge still at the moment as well during the lockdown. Over to you guys.
So since end of 2017, we have implemented this landscape approach in Indonesia, and particularly we have selected Aceh, Tamiang, and Southern Aceh, among other landscape, to commence this program. And why basically we choose Aceh? So it has an ecosystem that having considerable environmental, social, as well as the business values. It has a remaining high forested landscape, the looser ecosystem, which spans over 2 million hectares across Aceh. It's also connected to some of the key commodity supply chains, such as oil palm, rubber, cocoa, among others. In the other hand, it's the poorest province in Sumatra Islands. This leads to creation of a compelling livelihood and also economic development needs in those provinces. And despite wanting the global attentions, its uniqueness and also potential have given also an opportunity for us to safeguard these environmental, social, economic values through a sustainable commodity production. So how basically this landscape approach works in Aceh, like Jonathan said around the approach, as well as David saying about the collaborations that have taken. So what we have learned so far since the inceptions in 2017 led us to highlight some of the key initial steps. So the first one is basically understanding the issues. So we did this by overlaying the different information spatially, so that we are able to know where are the remaining forested areas, where are the deforestation is taking place, whether it is inside or outside concession, whether it is inside or outside area earmarked by the government as forest, and also we are also able to understand where are the potential future deforestation, and so on and so on. So basically, towards this process or steps, we build on a narrative that enable us to lay the first foundations to talk with the different stakeholders on what and where we should focus on our efforts. So the next step initial key step is understanding the key actors within the landscape. So we try to identify what are the interests and challenges among them. We start to engage, we start to build the trust, and what we have seen and found through these processes is that the first companies, many companies in Aceh Tamiang are small, privately owned companies with limited resources to do, a costly sustainable certification and all the preparatory works behind it. The communities, as 90% of deforestation are happening outside concessions to our spatial diagnostic. We also have seen that many of these communities, they have an old plantation that needs replanting, a very inefficient supply chains. They can only earn income around $50 to $70 per month per family. And with this income, 80% of it, they spend it to buy food. And you can imagine this was during the normal days, let alone under these COVID situations. They are very vulnerable actors in this case, and they're not resilient. And the third parties that we talk to is the government. They are basically in a dilemmatic situations. They know, they're aware that the deforestation is happening out there, but they can't just drive out these communities from the area without giving them any solutions. So what are the key solutions that we have implemented? So Steve will continue to explain more about these solutions concretely that have been implemented in Aceh Tamiang since the inception.
Great, thank you, Yulia. Can everyone hear me? Is everyone able to hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
All right. Very well. Thanks, everyone. So now, once we have all of that intelligence that Yul was talking about, the maps and the diagnostics, and once we have a good sense of who the key actors are and we've established relationships with them, this is when we can really move into the implementation phase, which is where things get exciting. So I want to talk about just 3 concrete examples here. And the first is on partnerships. And in particular, the formal partnership that we formed with the district government in Aceh Tamiang. So this came directly out of our efforts to share those maps and that intel with local stakeholders, pointing out to them in a very collaborative fashion, hey, here's where the risks and potential issues are on the one hand, but also where there's opportunities on the other that are in line with local aspirations. So sharing that information not only yielded a partnership with the government, which of course we're happy about, but it also inspired the head of the district, the Bupati, to announce a moratorium on the issuance of new palm oil licenses in the district, as well as an evaluation of existing licenses for potential issues. And I think that really speaks to the power of maps and data to persuade. The second example comes from companies and the impact that repeated hands-on training activities can have. So at this stage, we've trained fully 100% of the palm oil operations in the district on a range of sustainability and labor issues. What the team and I realized pretty quickly, though, was that these trainings, beyond just increasing awareness, were actually creating a pipeline of companies that were approaching us on an individual basis to express interest to take steps to improve their operations. And it was these individual engagements coming out of the trainings that led to the single largest block of forest inside a company concession anywhere in the district being mapped and protected with our support, and an additional 12 concessions and 2 mills announcing forest protection and no exploitation commitments of their own. So not bad, and all coming out of these hands-on trainings. Last but certainly not least is our work with the communities that live right on the edge, in some cases actually inside looser ecosystem itself, which, as you can imagine, places them at exceptionally high risk of deforestation. So at this stage, we've helped 8 of these communities to map their land, specifying exactly where they would like to concentrate their agricultural activities as well as where they would like to conserve forest. Now, this is great in theory, but to actually ensure that they have the means to protect that forest, we of course have to work with them in the villages to increase their agricultural capacity and know-how. And we do that by focusing on crop diversification so that they're resilient in the face of what are inevitable shocks, be it in the markets, palm oil prices, from climate, or as we're seeing now, a global pandemic where their household income from wages and labor are taking a significant hit. Now, even before COVID, we had a number of these farmers saying how proud and grateful they were to be able to grow this food for their families rather than be forced to purchase it at market at what are for them exorbitantly high prices. As Yul was saying, 80% of their household income. It's really remarkable. So you can imagine in the current context, having that know-how to grow the food for themselves can literally be the difference between being able to provide nutritious meals for their family or not. So this current pandemic is showing us in very real terms the importance of having resilient systems and resilient communities. Now, those are just three of what are really several impacts that we're seeing across our landscape work in Aceh. I won't spend too much time here other than to say that given that we're working across a large geographic region, we necessarily have to address a range of interconnected issues as they relate to forests, and workers, and livelihoods. And this connects to no less than 11 of the SDGs, which I'm sure very many of you on the call are familiar with and may actually even be tracking within your own companies and organizations. But one thing which is really quite dramatic and worth spending just a moment on is the impact that we monitor and are able to see from space. And that's the significant and really quite consistent decline in the rate of deforestation since the inception of the program. We attribute this to a number of factors. Of course, there are some external factors, global factors at play. But given how closely we work with the companies and the governments across this period, this multi-year period, we're confident that this significant increase in awareness on sustainability issues and also these concrete commitments from decision makers to protect remaining forest areas is a big part of the behavioral change that we're seeing. Now, it's all very encouraging, but that's not to say we should declare victory by any stretch of the imagination. The looser ecosystem still continues to see threats from all sides, and the conditions on the ground really are continuously evolving. The economic situation, the current pandemic, and even the political situation. So this requires us to be quite diligent and adaptive in our approach. And this brings me just to my final slide, which is our longer term vision and what we think is really essential to get there. So what we really want to see is a proof of concept, not just for local actors, but global actors as well, that we can balance the different types of commodity production with forest conservation and good social and labor practices at scale. And in one of the most globally important forest landscapes, no less. To get there, there's just 4 key elements that we think are absolutely essential. The first is we need to scale up to the whole system itself. There's good work happening in Aceh Tamiang and other regions, continues to happen, but as I mentioned, there are threats in other areas of looser that really need to be addressed in order to ensure the viability of this incredible ecosystem over the long term. With that expanded geographic scope, we need to focus very heavily on smallholder farmers. As we know, it's the majority of deforestation coming from smallholder farmers. And while finding solutions for these farmers may not be easy, one of the absolute best ways to do it is to engage and work with all sectors and other commodities in the landscape. Now, this can be a wellspring of ideas and new partnership models. But I think the thing worth mentioning here is palm oil is just one of the many players in this landscape, albeit a dominant one, but there's cacao, there's rubber, there's coffee, and engaging these actors is really essential. There is resilience in a diversity of commodities in the landscape. And last but not least, and this is in the DNA of our landscape work across the globe, as Jonathan was talking about, that's building the capacity of local actors and institutions to drive forward these interventions long after we're gone. This is about local ownership and local leadership. not creating a system where there's reliance upon external actors or continued support from outsiders. So that's really fundamental to the work. It's slow and patient work over a number of years, but really critical. Now, with that, just before I kick it back to you, Bastian, I just want to say a quick thank you to our partners and supporters, many of whom are on the call here today, Dave from Mars, Rob from Musimas, but just as well, of course, for those that aren't able to join us today. It is a collective, and needless to say, without these partnerships, none of this work would be possible. So a big thank you here from the Indonesia team.
Thank you, Stephen and Yuli. I think it was very good to get some insights of how resilience is being built, but also some of the challenge that you can point out. So I want to share the screen of the panelists that are joining us today, just to get their point of view. A quick answer to stimulate the discussions. That will, on your side, guys who are attending, please keep the questions coming. We've got a few very interesting questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end after the panel discussion, so we can really go into more detail. So I turn to Clément Tostivan. Clément, you are you work in the Sustainable Development Department in Avril. What has been your strategy to approach this challenge? We have questions around seeing palm oil as a risk or as an opportunity to drive change. What's been Avril's strategy and how have you driven it? And then maybe what can you tell us about the challenges and the opportunities that you've met along the journey?
Hi everyone. So maybe just first a few words about Avril Group. So we are an agro-industrial French company which operates mostly in oil and protein sectors. So our main business is to actually crush rapeseed and sunflower grains, and from that we get oils for energy, food or chemistry applications, and also meal, so rapeseed meal, sunflower meal, which goes into animal feed. So we have different business lines: food, feed, energy, and oleochemistry. And our main brands, consumer brands, are Le Sieur oil, Puget oils, maybe, or also Matin eggs for those who know. In addition, we do use palm oil for a variety of applications. Mostly, indeed, oleochemistry is an important sector for that. For us, the approach on palm oil is for several years we've been working on our sustainable palm policy. We initiated this 4 or 5 years ago and started working with Earthworm since then. And the process we followed with the help of Earthworm is basically the VTTV process of Earthworm, starting from values, meaning we drafted and published a palm policy with our ambition to aim for no deforestation palm. Then we worked on the transparency aspects and also traceability, where we got to ask for meals from our suppliers, so the meal list and the traceability up to the meals of our palm supply. So we are almost there on these aspects. For palm oil itself, we have almost full traceability, and we are still proving as regards palm oil derivatives, but we already have a good share of palm oil derivatives that are traceable to the meals. And so getting engaged in a landscape project was the normal continuation of the process. So we wanted to be more involved in transforming the supply chain, and we understood from Earthworm, from discussions with Earthworm, but also from requests from clients or other NGOs, that it was relevant to also get directly committed to a landscape project, collaborative project alongside clients of Avril, which are actually part of this APT program, or suppliers of Avril. So that's the steps we followed for several years and been engaged since end of 2018 in this APT program.
For you, what has been the biggest challenge in driving that journey? If you look at the whole journey from your supply chain perspective, but also connecting to landscapes, what is to you the biggest challenge?
Some challenges I think are also specific to Avril, but one of the challenge for us is we have various business units using palm oil, various suppliers and various amounts, types of products, because as you know, there are many derivatives or like qualifications of palm oil. So one major challenge for me as a sustainable development manager at group corporate level was actually to implement something that is like rule and a policy group level that works for our various businesses, different geographies. Like we have Oléon in Belgium, but we also have Le Cristal in Morocco, and they do not work always with the same suppliers, not the same supply chain. And we wanted to have a policy that works for everyone. And that was a challenge. And then actually create internally for me a network of contact points, both sustainability and purchase, to really create a team and an internal network to be in a dynamic of continuous improvement on this issue of palm oil. So from my perspective, one challenge was also related to our internal organization in Avril to set up a palm policy. And then, so this is internal and external. Of course, the first challenge is to engage the discussion with the suppliers on those topics. So when I look back 4 or 5 years ago, it was not so common, and for a purchaser to start asking questions about palm policies and so on was not so usual. Now it's much better, and that was also a challenge to actually initiate this.
In the Musimas group, Rob, you lead all that work on the ground, and Musimas is one of the key producers and traders of palm oil. From your perspective, how is it for a company such as yours to engage in the landscapes? What are the things that you find positive? What are the things that you find very challenging?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Musimas is a fully integrated palm oil producer. We have, plantations of our own. We buy a lot of CPO from producers who buy a lot of their crop from independent smallholders. There's massive challenges. My particular role is working with smallholders and how we upscale the impact of training and development, improving their livelihoods, as well as looking at environmental issues that are real challenges for smallholders. So I think for Musimas, one of the real challenges is just the sheer size, the number of smallholders, the needs that are out there. As an organization, we know that there's lots of companies doing different things. We saw working with Earthworm on this particular location in Tamiang as a great opportunity to reach more farmers, and also because it's an area that has a lot of delicacies in terms of the needs of people, the needs of the environment. And it's an area that's important for us as a sourcing area. So for Musimas, the real challenge is how do we work with other people? How do we achieve and reach the largest number of possible smallholders? And we think we've found that through landscape approaches. We've been working with Earthworm on this project now for a few years. We're looking forward to a continued partnership, but I'd really like to stress that it's all about, if we have a challenge, and it is a big challenge, it really should be about how can we face it together. And this includes the smallholders through to the government, through to the growers, producers, the middle people. And I'm talking about oil palm here, but it is a multi-commodity region. But it really is about how do we work together, because challenges can only be overcome if all players in the situation that we're in work together or are engaged to check and find a solution. So from my point of view, the biggest challenge has been the size of it and how we scale it up. I think there's been some very interesting lessons learned from what we've been doing through this project.
Thank you, Rob. Maybe one question to you is how is it to work with other industries? Because a lot of focus has been on the palm oil industry, and so I think there is some communication happening between the different palm oil companies. But then beyond, you have rubber companies on the side. You've got cocoa traders on the side. So is there? Have you managed to talk to these other companies, or is it not too existing at the moment?
Yeah, it's something that is happening. Obviously, our main focus has always been on palm oil, but yeah, it is important because there's common lessons. I think there's common traits in agriculture across the different industries, different commodities. But it is important to share, because if we, as say the biggest player in the agricultural sector, don't have the assistance and work together with the other players, we're never really going to achieve what we want as an industry or as across multi-commodity sector. So I think it is important. We have started, but there's room to do more of it.
Thank you, Rob. Great insight. There are a lot of questions and mentions around collaboration, and so I want to turn quickly to Jan Siriga, and I think you visited the project as well. One of the key things that TFA is doing is to drive for collective action. So could you share a little bit with us how you're putting that into practice in your region, and also in the same tone than before, what have been the positives and the successes and the challenges that you see as well?
Hi, Bastian. Thank you, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I think I would like to briefly share to you, maybe some of you may know already, but Tropical Forest Alliance, and maybe some of you not. So TFA is actually a partnership platform working in particular to advance landscape and jurisdictional agenda. So our role here, it's much more convening. So we don't do any implementations, but instead through the convening and dialogue, we support the work of our partners in government, private sectors, leading jurisdictional and landscape, and also to help the private sectors to mobilize engagement in landscapes they are working or sourcing. So with regards to the landscape and jurisdictional approaches, from our perspective, this is a very helpful approach in driving collective actions. Traditionally, we see that there have been extensive works in each landscapes in each jurisdictional, much more into a bilateral or supply chain based partnership. So I think as David and also Stephen, and you also mentioned that we need a collective actions here. So I think what TFA can support is how to increase much more collaborations in those existing landscape or jurisdictions, and also across sectors and among stakeholders, even though so far our works are still in the focus of oil palm and also pulp and paper, but mostly in the palm oil sectors. So what concrete ways that as a platform we support is in the global platform, we do jurisdictional exchange network, facilitating exchange learning in the across global in Latin America, Africa, and also Southeast Asia. And in Indonesia, we do have a jurisdictional dialogue exchanging different we're having, for example, our stakeholders are in Riau, in North Sumatra, in Aceh, and in West Kalimantan. So that's what we do to facilitate in terms of this landscape or jurisdictional exchange learning. However, we also support a jurisdiction leader who have the commitment that wanting to have more learnings through our global platform. So in annual meeting, TFA annual meeting. So last annual meeting, we had Bupati Siak, or the head of District Siak, to be in the discussion. So and learn about other jurisdictions, learning, for example, from Mato Grosso and from others how success is, and then we hope that that can bring back to the country. So yeah, looking ahead, we hope that our platform, the TFA, can remain committed to foster more linkage and collaboration and building stronger bridge between stakeholders to drive transformation at scale. And I think in the context of Aceh Tamiang, I had a privilege to be a part of, to be in the field trip. Thank you for our own team to invite me. So I think Aceh Tamiang, as FT mentioned, National Park, and also the habitat of Asian flagship species, and many people are relying on the environmental services, and these people are in the front line of those buffer zones. So I see that what the team has been done supporting the diversification of the livelihood is one way to support them and their subsistence, and also to help preventing encroachment to the buffer zone, because that's what we hope to prevent them from doing. So in terms of the learning that as a platform, I think we see that we are very grateful that, I mean, despite all different characters of the landscape and the jurisdictions, that we can facilitate and exchange learnings, as we know that Aceh and Riau might be different focus and priorities and context of the geographics and learnings. So the platform can support that exchange learning and potential collaborations. And potentially, if you're talking about the jurisdiction or landscapes, it is not only palm oil per se. So it can also invite other actors or stakeholders in the discussion. And yes, and another point is that we see that it's not much of a platform available that dedicated to be a space for exchange learning and catalyze actions in the landscape or jurisdiction level. So we see that our as a convener, we see that we can leverage their synergicity so that hopefully each stakeholders can work together. We also see that challenges working together in this multi stakeholder platform, that everyone, I mean, like each has a different interests and also priorities, different phase or progresses, and different context of geographic. However, we see this is also a way or opportunity to get everybody to have a common vision, and also without looking at the differences, yet to work together, as we know that this landscape or this commitment cannot be achieved only on working in silo. Instead, we need to work together. Thank you.
In the recent year, I think there's been an acceleration in the desire to drive action and to concretely make those collaborations happen. So I think thank you for sharing those views with us. David, I turn to you. There is a good question that I've seen coming in the chat. where someone said, well, we still see palm oil as a risk. Palm oil is something that is almost, something that companies want to avoid, and the problems as well. So eventually there is this tension in between driving transformation and engaging with problematic places and issues in terms of deforestation or in terms of exploitation. But there is also the need for you guys as a corporate to show your numbers going up. There is consumer pressure to basically get rid of deforestation and therefore make your supply chain exempt of risk. We're concentrating to plantations that are probably have deforested a long time ago and are not linked to recent deforestation. So what's your view, and how is Mars approaching that tension between the need to do transformation and the need to get the no deforestation numbers, KPIs up?
Yeah, no, great question. And if I frame it, and I realize we're getting close to the end here, Bastian, in our Palm Positive plan. I'm particularly proud that we even gave our plan the name Positive, because there is a lot to be positive about palm as well. But you have to confront the reality. You have to do the work. You have to understand your supply chain. You have to understand your suppliers, and you have to understand where that supply chain linkage is as well. So there's a lot to be positive about. I think as well, linking back to the landscape work here with Earthworm and others, how we're all joining up to bring scale. It's about confronting some of those root causes as well, isn't it? So there is a lot to be positive about. I think in some of the work within the APT, how do you make evidence-based decisions? So how, I think through some of the monitoring work Earthworm is doing, and with the Starling work, how do you actually help the communities and government on the ground understand where you can still do development and where you can't? And then where you can't, and again, as Steve and Yulia were alluding to, and there's a lot more there within that, of course, is what are the alternative sustainable livelihoods as well? And really thinking through how can you actually deploy those and work with the communities on the ground. So you make it evidence-based, you have the deep engagement on the ground, but this can all be done positively. It is, you have to confront the reality, but there are a lot of positive outcomes that can come through this, but you have to engage at a very deep level and have to look at the root causes and think through what are some of the alternative but sustainable livelihoods. I know it's absolutely solvable, and there's a lot to be positive about within this.
Thank you, Dave.
My answer.
No, I think it's a good answer, and I think corporates such as Mars, some of the corporates have taken action and started to invest really in trying to understand the root cause and participate to addressing them rather than just completely avoiding the problem. I think what we see at the moment is a lot of movement to call for action. We're almost in 2020. Many of those commitments started in 2010, and it's still only a handful of countries that are really implementing the change in the supply chain. And when I say change, it's just taking interest and getting involved, as you just mentioned, Dave, about understanding, the root causes and trying to drive change. I mean, there is also another question, because in this landscape work, clearly the government is central. And there's been a question saying, well, if the government doesn't make money by having or issuing palm oil concession licenses, which is a natural way for governments to create a revenue, what is the incentive, and what is going to be the way for the government to sustain their growth and their economic development in a somehow constrained expansion? So maybe Rob and Jan, you guys are closely in touch with the local governments, and you're familiar with this also strong tension that exists between the need to basically make the country attractive for investors, make the country look like it's delivering its climate and no deforestation targets, but on the other hand, make sure that the population thrives. So what are your point of view, Rob and Jan? Maybe Rob first and then Jan.
Thanks. It's a very delicate balance. I think you've indicated that. One classic example, I think, is what's happening through work and projects such as this in Aceh Tamiang, where the Bupati has come out with very strong commitments to the environment, where he's acted that internationally, and I think that's something to be applauded. And then you've got a number of supporters who were there, people from Mars, people from other companies who have been supporting this this approach in Tamiang at the moment. So it's a very delicate balance, but it takes bravery, it takes persistence, and it takes time, because it's a journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I'd just like to back up something David said. And you know what, we encourage companies. To be honest, Musimas could leave certain areas and say we're not going to buy crop or CPO from there. But that doesn't solve the problem. We could just say, okay, that's only 1% of our business, we'll leave it go. But the more people who do that, that 1% will become bigger and bigger. So I totally support organisations who are prepared to get in there, into the hard areas and do it. And that requires the work with the government. And sometimes there are hard conversations to be had. There's hard conversations to be had with the businesses as well, the growers, the smallholders. But it's honesty, and it's a genuine desire to move towards one goal. And it's a journey, as I say, it's not a destination, because it's never going to stop. It will change, it will improve, there will be improvements, there will be setbacks, but it's something that needs to be a long-term journey, not a short term.
Thank you, Robert. A good call for bravery and something that resonates well in I think many ears. Jan, what's your point of view on how for government to be winners in this way of working?
It's a very I see an opportunity for us, and also, I mean, the stakeholder. I think we need more dialogue, importantly, between the supply chains and also the communities and also the government. As we see that we are having a different level of government, district, provincial, and also in national. And national also, they have a different sectors and technicalities of the ministry. So what we need to do is to have more conversations, identify what kind of gaps and also opportunities that can work hand in hand to find win-win solutions. Be that in the government and also for the private sectors and also for the local communities. It is not easy, but I think I'm very positive that we can achieve this collectively or together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And we're coming to the end of this webinar. First of all, thank you to everyone, to those who spoke and to those who joined. For me, what comes out, and people ask, okay, what's after COVID? What will happen to all of that after lockdown? I think probably a higher focus on the absolute need to look after the farmers that are the roots of the supply chain, ensure their resilience in a multi-commodity fashion, and ensure the resilience of the ecosystems that our climate, our health rely on, which is forests and soils. So the call to action is really for companies, for those to continue to insist on developing those approaches in collaboration, as Jane highlighted, and recognize that the fragility of our current food chain has to be fixed. Is something that is just above us, and we've seen it with milk, as I said at the beginning, being dumped and the price is collapsing. This is very fragile. But this fragility needs our bravery, our humility to be able to get to listen to the landscapes, to understand what's happening, and together with the actors on the ground build solutions. Again, a very big thank you. We've recorded that webinar and we'll make it available. We'll have other webinars on other topics coming soon. And I wish you everyone a very good day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.